Realm presents Machina, Episode 5.
Another 5 minutes. Another 5 minutes. Finish out the mile. Finally, Trey pushed pause on the elliptical glider. He hated interrupting his workout. Hated it. Never did it. Which was exactly why it was the perfect time to get this done. No one was around, and in the unlikely event that someone found the insertion and checked the time code, Trey had the perfect alibi. Even when he was being sneaky, he was a genius. Trey jogged down the partially lit halls, keeping an eye on the programmed tracks of the cleaner bots on his device so he could avoid even their limited perception. Data key safely in the sweaty pocket of his gym shorts. Feeling extra cool, he looked both ways before slipping into the clean room. Just in case anyone looked into it, he used Balroth's code, chuckling to himself. Once inside, it was the work of moments to access Y3's base code and add in the snippet of code. It was satisfying, too. If Stephanie was going to cheat, Trey was just going to cheat better. After all, this wasn't just about Trey's ego or DevLok's survival. It was about Mars. Trey wasn't a fool. He had looked carefully at the code and even built a little walled-off simulator of the Y3 to do some quick and dirty testing. It did seem to speed up computation and decision-making. Stephanie, he was sure, would never have dared to take such a risk. Well, that was why he got the big bucks. That was why he would win. On the way out of the clean room, Trey paused, then snapped his head around. He thought he had heard something behind him, but he didn't see anyone. He tried to remember if he had looked both ways when he opened the door, then shrugged. Probably just one of the cleaning bots. Once again. The flat irritation in Nico's tone was enough to pull Cameron out of their unintentional daydream. They sat up, blinking to clear away the after-images of an imagined tryst with Noor in a supply closet as Nico went on. We have to look beyond Mars. Mars is the entire purpose of this company. If Nico was low on patience, Stephanie was totally out of it. Cameron sank back in their chair and considered whether daydreaming was a better use of their time. Look at the mission statement. Companies evolve, Nico said, tight-jawed. What happens if you lose this bid? You need a contingency plan. Stephanie scoffed. We're way ahead, and if we do somehow lose, we can evolve then. Cameron suspected Stephanie would be okay with losing, as long as Watchover came out ahead of DevLok in the final rankings. Nico's not entirely wrong, Lakshmi said, as if that were a huge concession. Stephanie turned on her, drawing breath for an attack, but Lakshmi continued calmly. What we've done, she gestured to include Cameron, with E is groundbreaking and important. We owe it to E and to the world to look broadly at potential use cases. You owe it to the investors, Nico interjected. And by the way, while they're here, could we not refer to E as if it were a person to which we owe things? Lakshmi opened her mouth to respond, but Nico held up his hand. If you don't agree, just pretend you do for the duration of the visit, okay? He leaned forward. I have to repeat this at almost every company I work for. I don't care how genius your coding is or what your technology has to offer. Without money, you won't be able to develop or sell it. Nico waited a beat for that to sink in. Now, to go back again to the agenda for the visit. Cameron managed not to roll their eyes. They had already memorized the agenda, and so they knew that this visit was going to be a nightmare. The part that they couldn't quite get over was that, at the end of the day, the whole senior team was supposed to accompany the investors to the moonshot for some unstructured social interactions. It sounded hellish. Besides, Cameron couldn't think about the moonshot anymore without thinking about Noor, her sly smile as she programmed Pseudo better than anyone could have expected her to, her intense focus at game night, and, of course, the roof. Then, of course, Cameron's presentation. Cameron, snapped out of their reverie by hearing their name, tried to look attentive and prepared, but Nico was already moving on to the next bullet, and nobody was looking at them anyway. This was ridiculous. A couple of weeks ago, Cameron would have been hyped for this investor visit, wanting to get everything right for Watchover, and shine individually besides. Catching the attention of investors could be a critical career move, especially if something went wrong at Watchover and they had to jump ship. Now they could barely keep their mind on what was going on for 5 minutes straight. They had thought they could keep the distraction to off-work hours, but that did not seem to be possible. Maybe this was not the right time for a relationship. Maybe they should stop seeing Noor. They tried to imagine how that conversation might go, what Noor might say to try to convince them, what she might do. Cameron? Yes? They blinked. Sorry, I was, thinking about the next trial. Stephanie and Lakshmi beamed, because of course that was more important than the investor visit. Nico glowered. What was the question again? This crush was definitely too distracting. But would cutting it off really help them concentrate? Denise looked up in response to the rapid knocking on her open door and was surprised to see Bharath. She wasn't sure if he had ever voluntarily come to her office before. She had certainly had his staff drop by to talk about him, but Bharath didn't seem to see any usefulness in human resources as a department, or her services as an approach to dealing with personnel issues. Since Denise had moved to compliance, they had interacted frequently in meetings, but he had never proactively sought out her assistance in that area either. Definitely one of those who expected to be told when there were compliance issues, as opposed to proactively avoiding them. Yes, she said, waving him in. What can I do for you? Bharath looked agitated. He was breathing hard, as if he had run to her office, which was hard to imagine, or maybe he was literally fuming. Denise couldn't help finding it a teeny bit amusing to watch. Could I get you some water? She asked as solicitously as she could. Bharath shook his head. I need to tell you this. I am not sure what to do. Denise frowned, leaning forward and bracing herself for some terrible accusation. Or maybe someone had been injured? She glanced up at the corridor, but no one else seemed to be running around in alarm. I was going over the Y3 code one more time, Bharath gasped. I didn't have to, you understand. This wasn't a scheduled review. I just like to be very, very sure before the trial starts. Okay, Denise murmured. There is code in there, Bharath said, stabbing his finger at her desk, that I don't know where it comes from. Denise wasn't sure what to make of that. Aren't there, thousands of lines of code? Millions, Bharath glared at her. But this bit was added today, early this morning, and I have never seen it before. Oh, right. There are trackers for this sort of thing. If you know when it was added, don't you know who put it in? Bharath's shoulders slumped. There is no identity on the log, but it was my code that was used to open the clean room doors. Okay, Denise said after a moment's reflection. We're taking this to Trey. Trey wasn't in his office, but there was an internal app that tracked people using key swipes, cleanerbot sightings, and workspace logins, and they found him in the gym, pounding away at the elliptical. As Denise understood it, the elliptical trainer wasn't supposed to be pounded on, but that's what Trey was doing, with the face to match. This was not going to be a fun conversation. Denise positioned herself in front of the machine and waved, then waved both arms, then yelled, Finally, Trey lifted his eyes from whatever he was glaring at on his device and, with an extra grimace of annoyance, hit pause on the machine. "Well?" he snapped, pulling his earbuds out. Denise coughed. "Sorry to bother you, but something important has come up." She gestured at Balroth, who swallowed hard but explained the problem coherently enough. Trey's legs were still circling on the machine, but slowly now. He said, which was not the reaction Denise had expected. Nor Balroth, it seemed.
"Sir, this is a major security breach. The code could have been inserted by Watchover, or, for that matter, any of the other rival teams. I have already removed it, but the security problem—"
"You removed it?" Trey stopped moving so fast, the pedals backtracked and he almost fell off the machine. Of course, being Trey, he managed to turn it into an almost graceful leap to the floor instead.
"Well, yes," Balroth said, gaping. "I couldn't leave untested code in there. We go to the trial in 36 hours. A loss of signal trial, sir. We won't know what the machine is doing."
Denise was starting to have a suspicion. "Trey?" He was pacing now and barely looked at her. "Trey, did you do this?" Balroth's key code, a nameless log entry. Yes, Trey could easily have managed those. She pulled up the locator app on her phone. "Balroth, what time did you say the insertion was logged?" "Yes, all right, fine." Trey swung back to face them. He paused for a moment, working something out, and Denise braced herself for the excuse. "I had a moment of inspiration," Trey said at last, and Denise blinked. "Just thinking, in the middle of the night, and I saw how it should be, and there was no time to run through the full testing procedure, so—" Balroth was glaring resentfully.
"Sir, you could have just told us."
Trey waved his objection away, muttering something about the spirit of the thing, and then, perhaps realizing they were both still annoyed, exploded off on another tangent. "You're right about the danger from Watchover, though. We're going to change all the keys." Denise opened her mouth to mention how that was both annoying and totally unfounded in anything that had actually happened, but Trey was still barreling on. "And I want strict no fraternization policies enforced. Not just the bar. I don't want any of our staff talking to any of their staff until the second trial is underway." "That's probably not legal," Denise offered. She wished she was sure about that, wished she was as well trained in compliance as she had been in HR. "Then amend their NDAs," Trey snarled. "What's the problem? It's only, 36 hours? Surely they can hold off on their board games and booty calls until then." "Ready?" Stephanie asked, again.
"I'm ready," Cameron said, trying not to snap. "But I also have a million other things I could be doing to get ready for the trial. The trial is important, of course, but securing financing is crucial," Nico said. Stephanie and Cameron both turned to glare at him, and he threw his hands in the air and turned away. "Seriously, Steph," Cameron said, "this is a ridiculous thing to be spending my time on when E is about to undergo an incredibly difficult challenge, totally disconnected from us." They shot a glance at Lakshmi for support, but Lakshmi had that gentle look on her face that meant she was probably going to say something Cameron wouldn't like. "Maybe it's for the best that you are distracted from the loss of signal issue for a while," Lakshmi said. "You have to be willing to let go of control." "Could we not talk about letting go of control over the incredibly powerful robot while the investors are here?" Nico demanded.
Lakshmi might have been acutely insightful into how Cameron's mental emotional state was, but she did not know how to deal with Nico. She turned to him to argue the point, but was thankfully forestalled by a soft chime from the monitor in the wall. "That's simplicity, letting us know they're here," Stephanie said, sounding tenser than she probably wanted to. Cameron's phone vibrated in their pocket, and they scooped it out. "Cameron," Stephanie hissed, but Cameron ignored her. It would take them at least 3 minutes to walk up here, even without the obligate oohing and ahhing at simplicity. They had plenty of time to read a text message, except that this message was from Noor. Cam, we've just gotten word that we're not supposed to talk to anyone from Watchover until the trial has started. It's a bullshit policy, but it's also only 108,106 minutes, right? I'm sure I can last that long without talking to you. Cameron stared at their phone, heart pounding. It vibrated again, just as the door to the conference opened. 108,105 minutes. Heat flooded through them. The flow of investors into the room felt like a crowd. Fortunately, they bottlenecked into greetings, figured out degrees of separation, and made stupid jokes with Stephanie, Lakshmi, and Nico for a few minutes before they got to the much less important Cameron. By that time, Cameron managed to mouth some introductions, and then there was a brief respite while Stephanie stood at the front of the room and welcomed everyone. Fucking Trey. How did he think he could tell his staff what they could and couldn't do when they weren't in the office? Or maybe the order had come from Bharath? No, Bharath was a hard-ass about work, but it would never occur to him to regulate what his coders did during leisure time, probably because he couldn't imagine they had any. Cameron? They jumped, hoping that was the first time Stephanie had to say their name, and pulled on their presentation face, striding to the front of the room. Welcome again, everyone. What had Stephanie said in the introduction? I'm really here to introduce you to E. Cameron touched a button on the wall, and a phalanx of tiny hover drones flew into the room, settling into the air in front of each visitor. Say hi, E. The drones bobbed simultaneously, eliciting laughs. Now, before we really get started, does anyone want tea, coffee, soda, or water? Please let E know. While the investors skeptically or gleefully murmured their desires to the drones in front of them, Cameron had a brief space to think, smile still pasted on. Why was this bothering them so much? Noor was right. It was only a matter of hours. Besides, hadn't Cameron themselves just been toying with the idea of breaking it off until after the trials to reduce distractions? Why did the thought of no contact for 2.5 days feel like free fall? The E-bots were zipping out of the room one by one. Time for the punchline. Oh, I suppose we can have some refreshment too. 4 new bots came in, heading for Cameron, Stephanie, Lakshmi, and Nico. Tea. No sugar, no milk. Cameron told theirs clearly, wishing they could order a scotch instead. The idea for this demo came from Pseudo after all. This may seem like trivial functionality for an AI powerful enough to help us colonize another planet, but the number of options and components make it an excellent demonstration of E's ability. We didn't know what you would want when you came in, so we couldn't pre-program a routine. We didn't even pre-program subroutines for the different drinks. E has learned about coffee and tea and their various options over a few months of practice. Moreover, E optimizes the approach for each set of orders. And now Cameron just had to keep talking until E came back in sets of 5, balancing the drinks. When Denise knocked on the door, Trey looked up from his work and immediately got a sheepish look on his face. Well, he should feel guilty, Denise thought, keeping a stern expression on. That ridiculousness of using Bharath's key code could have ended up far, far worse. But this conversation wasn't about that. Denise, Trey greeted her warily. Trey, I've been looking over what you asked me to, about Watchover's potential violations of non-compete clauses or possible code theft. Trey leaned back in his chair, looking more relaxed. And? Did you find it yet? No. There's nothing to find. There's no evidence they took anything, and no legal way to check their code against ours. Trey raised one finger, which Denise eyed suspiciously. As you say, Denise. As I say, no legal way. Trey stood up, leaned over his desk. We know they cheated. It's impossible that they did this without cheating. Impossible. So we just have to figure out how they did it, and to do that, we may need to be a little creative. What exactly are you asking me to do? Denise tried to keep her voice level. Was this why Lakshmi left? Did Trey ask her to do something like this? Something illegal? Just keep looking, Trey said, sitting down again and turning back to his work. Let me know when you find something. From the back of the conference room, Lakshmi watched Cameron's presentation, her frown deepening. It wasn't bad, and as someone who didn't know Cameron, it probably looked perfectly adequate. But Lakshmi had seen Cameron do so much better. They had Lakshmi's intuition for code, coupled with Stephanie's ability to read a room, to captivate an audience. In short, to make people like them. For all their talent, Cameron was not immune to nerves, and they had been off their game for a few weeks in the run-up to the trial. But this was worse. Lakshmi toyed with her phone under the table, wondering if desegregating the surveillance data to review Cameron's recent movements would help her to understand what was wrong and support them in working through it. But that, she reminded herself, was probably not something she should think about while the investors were here. In any case, it was probably just Cameron's usual fear of catastrophic error, of E doing something unredeemable to the environment while they weren't watching. It wasn't impossible, of course. Another thing Lakshmi shouldn't mention in front of the investors. But Lakshmi was still trying to figure out how to explain to Cameron that it could happen just as easily, more easily, if there was no AI involved. Cameron finished the presentation to light applause, and Stephanie stepped to the front again. And now, if you would like to join us, we'll take you on a brief tour of the facilities here at Watchover. The tour should have been easy, a break in the intensity of the visit, but, and Lakshmi should have foreseen this, instead of clumping behind Stephanie and listening as they should have, the investors fragmented and honed in on different Watchover staff. Some orbited Nico, a few pursued Cameron, and one persistent woman insisted on making small talk with Lakshmi as they walked. "Quite a place," the woman said. She was older than Lakshmi, heavy-set, with professionally dyed dark blonde hair twisted up on her head, and a pencil skirt in some kind of nubbly material of a tomato red shade that exactly matched her earrings and her lipstick. "I heard you all built it very fast." "Yes, we had to get it ready in time for the trials." Lakshmi became aware partway through the sentence that the tone she was using did not hide her disdain for the question. "And so close to that other outfit. What is it? DevLok?" Lakshmi eyed the woman, wondering how she had gotten the money that made her an investor. Was she devious or curious, or neither? "Yes," she said. "The geography here is useful for Mars simulations, so it's not surprising that enterprises interested in this area congregate." "Of course." The investor nodded once, twice. "And I hear you have some history with DevLok, too." "Yes." Was she fishing for gossip or trying to decide where to invest? "Well, you must like it so much better working for yourself." An attempt at womanly solidarity? "We're very happy with what we've achieved here," Lakshmi managed and felt quite proud of herself. "And your AI is so good, too," the investor gushed, and Lakshmi felt her face tighten. "You know, most of the time they're these scary machines. Like, they've designed them for war instead of, whatever it is we need to do on Mars to live there." Lakshmi opened her mouth, not sure how she was going to respond, but before she could say anything, she felt a hand on her elbow and looked around to see Nico smile.
"Excuse me, Mrs. Harving, if I could just borrow Dr. Singh for a moment."
Barely waiting for a response, he guided Lakshmi to the nearest door, opened it, and pulled her in, surprising the accountants who worked there.
"Sorry,"
Nico said to them over his shoulder and then turned to Lakshmi.
"Listen."
He hesitated.
We both know you don't want to be here. Why don't you skip the dog and pony show? Go take a half day. Do something for yourself.
Lakshmi thought about fighting it, forcing him to say that he didn't want her there instead of the other way around. But what was the point? Good idea, she managed. I'll give you a few minutes to move on and then head out.
Good thinking. He echoed her with a nod and ducked out the door again.
Lakshmi pulled out her phone rather than meet the gaze of any of the accountants, set a timer for 5 minutes, and dived into AO3 until it went off. She snoozed the alarm for another 5 just in case, and because she had found a good fic, and when she cautiously opened the door, the hallway was empty. No embarrassing explanations necessary. No more investor time required. She should be ecstatic, really. Lakshmi didn't want to get caught in the building, so she checked the locations for Nico and Stephanie on her phone and made her way to the parking lot, where she got in her Tesla and sat there, behind the wheel, wondering where she should go. If she were Stephanie and given some unexpected time off, she would probably go see her kids. Steal some time with the kids. That's what Stephanie would say, as if it were illicit to spend time with her family. Or maybe she meant stealing the time with them from her wife, although from everything Lakshmi had heard about parenting, she doubted it. Or maybe Steph would go bouldering. She never referred to that as stealing some time with the great outdoors or robbing some personal time for exercise. Lakshmi had a Pilates class she went to 3 times a week, but now was not the right time for it, and working out on the machines by herself did not appeal. What did other people do? After thinking for a while, Lakshmi decided to turn to the data. She pulled it out in aggregate, looking at the movements of Watchover staff during leisure hours. There was a clear pattern. She turned on the car and put it into drive. It didn't occur to Lakshmi until she was almost at the door that there was an unusual dearth of vehicles parked in front of the moonshot. She hesitated, but her hand was already reaching for the doorknob, and so she turned it and the door opened, so she went in. Hello? Empty of people, it was easier to see the Airstream bones behind the front section of the bar. Also easier to notice where it was worn down. During the evenings, filled with people, music, and noise, the moonshot seemed invulnerable, vibrant, maybe like E, alive in its own way, or like Smith's, somehow untouchable, unaffected by the normal tribulations of working life. But now it looked like an empty room, lonely, almost as if... There was a crash and a wild mechanical barking from the back of the building, and Lakshmi stiffened and turned toward the door in time to see Pseudo bound out with preternatural agility before stopping short in front of her.
Hold on, Pseudo, I'm coming. Don't hurt anyone.
Smits emerged from the back, still pulling a t-shirt over his surprisingly well-muscled abdomen. Earned moving kegs of beer around, probably, Lakshmi thought, and wondered if he had looked like that back when he still worked for DevLok. Hi, she said. Sorry to bother you in off hours. Lakshmi had to stop to take a breath and realized she was still recovering from the burst of adrenaline. Sorry, I know Pseudo can't bite, but that charge definitely triggered some atavistic dog-related panic.
Take a seat, Smith said, guiding her to a chair and pulling it out. Here, let me get you some water. Anyway, he added as he filled a glass at the tap, your instincts weren't wrong. Pseudo can't bite, but he is equipped to protect the place. He handed her the glass with the flash of a grin. But he knows you, so you weren't in any danger.
I'm honored, Lakshmi said, giving Pseudo's smooth head casing an affectionate rub. She waited for Smits to ask why she was there at such an unusual hour, but to her relief, he didn't.
Can I get you something else? He asked instead as she sipped her water. Coffee? Tea? Whiskey?
No. Well, yes.
Yes?
He raised his eyebrows at her. A drink would be good. Whatever you'll join me in. Smits reached for a bottle and 2 tumblers. Lakshmi leaned back in her seat. Maybe it had been a good idea to come here. Cameron let their eyes flick up to the countdown clock and then yanked them down again. The whole time they had been stuck with the investors, they couldn't wait to get back here on the coding floor. But now that they were, all they could think of was how badly this might go. They weren't even looking at the safety processes for the new trial. Cameron was going over and over the logs from the last one. Why had E decided to build such an elaborate structure instead of a simple shelter? Why the turrets? Why the arched doorways? Yes, the fantastic design had won the trial for them, and Cameron could explain exactly how E had done it. E had access to a wealth of architectural information and designs, cross-referenced with techniques and everything else they could find. And E spent a lot of time in his sandbox in the basement experimenting with different materials. The question was, why? Out of all the blueprints and diagrams in E's databases, why that one? Cameron had been over the log 6 times, and they couldn't even pinpoint the moment when the decision had been made, let alone the why of it. The foundation, for example, was not any deeper than it would have been for a simpler structure. So had E settled the design from the beginning, or on the fly? Cameron pushed back from their screen.
We need a more detailed log. We need to make sure we can do a proper post-mortem next time, not this guesswork. We need...
Tama held up a hand.
Cameron, we are doing what we can, okay? E is doing fine. We can't spend a bunch of time right now on better documentation when what we've got is just fine. It's not fine, Cameron said. If we can't understand what happened in the first trial, then our documentation is not fine. We don't know what will happen this time, and anything could go wrong. Oi!
Tama slid back from his workstation, and Cameron startled a little. They had never heard him yell quite like that. He calmed almost immediately, though.
Listen, Cameron, he said, running a hand over his close-shorn head. You need to take a break. Take it from a friend. You are getting too wound up about this. I can't take a break now, Cameron said, and realized they were yelling too. I just got back from a complete waste of time with the
Tama coughed a loud, "Shut up!" at them, and Cameron looked up in time to see that annoying reporter studiously not looking at them.
Just go take a walk or something, okay? Tama pleaded. We're fine here, I promise, and we need you on your game for the trial. Even with loss of signal?
Cameron asked bitterly, but they got up anyway.
Even with loss of signal, it won't be the entire trial, and we need you ready.
Cameron grumbled something, grabbed their fake leather jacket — it was close to sunset and the temperature dropped fast without the sun — and made their way to the parking lot. Once outside the front doors, Cameron paused, not sure what to do. Well, they knew what they wanted to do, but should they? Noor could get fired just for talking to them, let alone what Cameron had in mind. But Noor could easily say no, and Cameron really wanted to see her. In that moment, seeing Noor seemed like the only thing that could calm this relentless anxiety. They pulled out their phone and wrote a text.
Wanna break some rules?
Stephanie said goodbye to the last of the investors, her cheeks aching from the effort of maintaining a smile that she was sure no one believed anymore. She waited, waving and smiling until the last of them was completely gone from the view of the sliding glass doors at the entrance, then gave it another slow-counted 15 seconds without waving but still smiling, just in case. Finally letting the corners of her mouth drop, she turned to Nico. He looked pleased, almost smug, and Stephanie decided she wasn't going to thank him for doing his job. "Good to get that over with," she said instead, with an exaggerated sigh, and noted with pleasure his startled look. Nico probably loved this stuff. "See you at the trial watch party." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away. She was done with kissing ass for the day, done with even being polite. Why, she wondered as she turned into the stairwell, better exercise and a better chance of avoiding other people than the elevator. Did she think that becoming successful and wealthy and, starting her own fucking company would absolve her from ever having to kiss ass again? Maybe because it had worked for Trey. He didn't have to justify his supposed genius. Investors came flocking to him. Any investor tours he had done were completely on his own terms, as if he couldn't care less whether they coughed up or not, because he knew there would always be more. That was probably why today had felt so awkward for Stephanie. She'd never seen one of these done before. Not this way. Trey always thought he'd have plenty of people to back him. Maybe this competition was where he'd finally be proven wrong. Reaching her office at last, Stephanie went to the bar and poured herself 2 fingers of well-earned whiskey. She carried the tumbler through the intermediary conference room to see if Lakshmi was in her office, but her co-founder wasn't there. Stephanie spared a moment to hope that Lakshmi hadn't been offended by being asked to leave, but she was pretty confident that Lakshmi had enough sense to be grateful for any excuse to get out of there. Closing both doors to her office, she went to her desk and sat down, sipped her whiskey, tapped a key to illuminate the screen. She had to relax. A few hours before the trials, relaxing was practically mandated best practice. It was self-care. It was necessary. With one last glance to make sure the doors were closed, Stephanie clicked on the All Eyes program. It was soothing, watching the dots flow across the screen. All anonymized, of course. Stephanie didn't click on any of the smaller dotted lines that represented emails, text messages, and phone calls. She didn't check to see who that was at the moonshot during working hours. She just watched. Noor looked at her phone and inhaled sharply. Yes, she thought. Yes, I do want to break some rules, especially stupid ones. And especially with you. She looked around. This was perfect timing, probably. She was curled in one of the sofas in the mezzanine above the pit, observing the preparations for the second trial, but also feeling just a little extraneous. All the same, though, she didn't want to lose her job. She didn't want anyone to notice that she was leaving during working hours. She didn't want chance to determine that someone saw her car parked somewhere and ratted her out. There was a workaround for that, though. Of course there was. Noor opened the shuttle schedule and formulated a plan. "Pick me up at Stater's in 15 minutes, she typed, and headed for the door. Waiting in the foyer, Noor had a moment's worry that the shuttles had been canceled during the trials. But no, there it was, an auto-driven minibus that was supposed to build links between the DevLok campus and the negligible nearest town of Tessier. As usual, the shuttle was empty. The only time Noor had seen more than 3 people on it was on Friday nights, when some people used it as a cheap ride to the 2 not moonshot bars on the main street of town. She couldn't help eyeing the camera planted squarely above the windshield, but then firmly turned her attention to the window. She had an excuse. She was going to get snacks for the trial observers. She got off in front of the supermarket and, after hesitating a moment to be sure that Cameron wasn't in one of the parked cars lining the street, walked into the air conditioning and grabbed a cart. Maybe this was a bad idea. Noor selected a bunch of grapes, a bag of tangerines. She didn't want to get fired, even if having an actual rule against fraternizing made her question whether Trey was as smart as she had believed. On the other hand, would they really fire her? It seemed so silly, and maybe Noor needed to be the one to make a point about this, since she was not a coder and arguably had less to lose. No, Noor told herself firmly. You are not getting caught. You are here to see Cameron. And with that thought, all her objections were swept aside, because she wanted to see Cameron. Nora's lips curved into a smile, remembering Cameron at game night. This could be turning into something very sweet. She wasn't going to let some corporate Capulet Montague assholery end it. Her phone buzzed.
You in there?
Nora's smile widened. Be right out. Cameron was driving a turquoise blue Leaf, and when Nora slipped into the passenger seat, they hesitated for an endearing second before leaning over and waiting to see if Nora would meet their kiss. Nora leaned until their lips touched, and it was like an infusion of champagne, giddy happiness filling her. Where are we going? She asked, a little breathless as she fastened her seatbelt. Cameron shrugged, turning their attention to the road and signaling.
Just somewhere away from...
A wave of one hand.
All of this.
They shot a quick, sly smile over at Nora.
Hiding in plain sight, you might say.
Cameron drove them through the atrophied downtown and a few blocks further, then parked in the shadow of the water tower, a bulbous light blue structure that dominated the meager skyline.
Feel like a climb?
They asked, turning off the car but not taking the key from the ignition, as if they weren't quite sure this was an acceptable suggestion. Nor, gaping up at the tower, wasn't sure either. Climb that? Sure, Cameron said, and nodded to the rungs protruding from the base of the thing like oversized staples.
Get a view, you know?
Nor reasoned that there weren't very many good date options in the area, especially once you excluded the moonshot. All right, let's do it. Nor found the climb terrifying, but in the exhilarating way of something she had dared herself to do and couldn't quite believe she was following through on. She had to remind herself that as long as she kept at least one hand closed on a rung at all times, she couldn't possibly fall. And then it was just step after step until she made it. She hadn't expected anything comfortable at the top, maybe a narrow catwalk around the rim, but it turned out the whole roof of the tower was accessible, a fenced, slightly domed expanse of pale blue metal suspended high in the air. Nor joined Cameron where they were leaning on the fencing near the ladder. Wow, she exhaled. It was indeed a view. The town, sprawled at the feet of the water tower, was barely noticeable at all, and beyond that was the desert, in all its gradations of color and shape, and the enormous sky. The sun was setting, and the western horizon was a flare of color. Nor thought maybe she could even make out a smudge of gray from the fires in California, but that was probably fanciful. It's incredible. Cameron agreed and kissed her. Probably no one could see them up here, Nora thought after a while. Probably it was fine. As if they could hear her, Cameron pulled back.
What do you think about... Could we go somewhere a little more private?
Sure, Nora whispered, smiling up at them. Where did you have in mind?
How about my place? Cameron offered.
Really?
Why not? I'm not forbidden from seeing you. Besides, we're using my car. It's a private apartment. Who's going to know?
All right then, Nora agreed. As they turned toward the ladder, she took one more sweeping gaze around the vista. Wow, that's a weird rock formation, she commented, pointing out away from town. It was a striking sight, like a mesa had been chopped up, riddled with gaps and holes.
It's not a rock formation,
Cameron muttered, and for a second their face was drawn, almost haunted. Nor glanced back at the strange sight and opened her mouth to ask what it was if not a rock formation, but when she turned around again, Cameron was already starting down the ladder.
Come on, they said. I don't have that much time before I have to get back to finish the prep.
Cameron's place was way nicer than Nor's, but then again, they had been here longer. It was a condo in one of the few multi-story apartment buildings in town, known as the dorm at DevLok because of the preponderance of staff who lived there. Cameron's living room was pretty sparse, but the kitchen looked well-stocked and used.
"You're okay being here?" Cameron asked, twisting their hands at the bedroom door. "I don't want to get you fired."
"I'm sure it's fine," Nora said, tossing her phone down on the bedside table next to Cameron's. "How is anyone going to know?" "So, are you liking this whole bar thing?" Lakshmi's syntax was not usually so loose, but it had taken her 3 drinks to work up to this question. When he was dealing with a crowded room of drinkers, Smits seemed practically built to purpose, so well did he fit into his new role. But Lakshmi remembered how he had been as head programmer. He had been awfully good at his job. What's more, he had seemed to enjoy it, inasmuch as anyone enjoyed working at DevLok. Smits took a swallow and rolled his glass around for a while before answering.
"Some of it," he said at last. "Quite a lot of it, maybe. It's nice to have to be physical in my work. You know, get up and grab things, carry things. And it's nice to talk to people, not just about work, but about everything, and not always the same people."
There was a pause.
"And there's a lot I don't miss about the other work, if that's what you're asking."
"But some you do," Lakshmi inferred. It must be the drink pushing her to talk like this. Normally, she left conversations wherever the other person wanted to leave them.
"Some I do," Smits agreed, still rolling his glass and watching it catch the light. "I miss, the challenge of it, maybe. Or more than that, the feeling when you come up with a solution and it's just right, elegant. It fits, like this whole elaborate world of made-up languages and arbitrary hardware conventions suddenly makes total sense, just for you."
Lakshmi found herself nodding.
"Occasionally, I get something similar here, you know, when I figure out just the right way to deal with whatever, but it's never quite that specific or satisfying."
"It's been ages since I've had that feeling at all," Lakshmi said. "I don't get down into the weeds very often these days."
"And do you like being what do you two call yourselves again?"
Lakshmi looked up sharply, but there was no mockery in his tone, and his expression showed only curiosity. "Co-founders, creative operating officers." Stephanie had come up with a twist on the usual acronym, and at the time, Lakshmi had thought it was brilliant, but now she was embarrassed to say it. Smits had reached for the bottle again and was twisting off the cap.
"And? Do you like it?"
He added liquid to both their glasses, then got up to rummage behind the bar. Lakshmi was relieved not to have his full attention on her as she answered. "Some of it," she said, as he had, but it felt weak, so she went on. "I like what we've created. E is extraordinary, and it is incredible to be a part of that, to lead it. And I like working with the younger programmers, you know, trying to guide them, not just in the coding itself, but in everything else they need to make it in this world. You know, managing other coders and presentations and..." She was about to say, dealing with investors, but choked it off. She hadn't been much of a role model in that arena today. Smits didn't seem to notice.
"You always were a great teacher," he said, coming back to the table and tossing down a bag of vegan jerky and a box of crackers. "Sorry, all I can manage without going back to the kitchen."
Lakshmi couldn't help feeling pleased that he didn't want to break off the conversation to cook. Or maybe he was signaling that he did? No. Smits wouldn't be that oblique, at least not with her. "Why don't you teach pseudo?"
"That's not a bad idea,"
Smits mused, as the dog, hearing its name, raised its blank head from where it lay at their feet.
"I'd have to get some new attachments, though."
"Such a good idea of yours, this dog," Lakshmi said. "It must be good company for you." Smits looked at her as though he were wondering something but didn't want to ask.
"Not company, exactly," he said slowly.
But it gives me a chance to program something every once in a while. He sounded self-deprecating, and even though she knew she shouldn't, Lakshmi and her 3.5 bourbons couldn't help saying, "You know, you could always come back. We'd give you every facility." Smits was shaking his head. No, I'm done. I really am. I have to rest my eyes and my wrists, and besides," he cracked a grin, "as I said, there's a lot I don't miss." "Investor visits?" Lakshmi suggested. Smits grimaced so expressively she had to laugh, and some of her tension dissipated. "That, the whole hamster wheel of money. And working for Trey, I don't miss that," he added, and he and Lakshmi clinked glasses. "And not having a life outside of work. I don't miss that part at all. Not that I have much of a life here," he said hastily, "but I could." Lakshmi couldn't think of anything to say, and the silence stretched out lazily between them. "Anyway," Smits went on at last, "Pseudo gives me just the right amount of programming for where I am right now. And it's fun, because you just whip up a routine or two, and then you get to see exactly what you've done. Not like coding up some tiny cog in an enormous program where you can barely even see what your part accomplishes." "Sounds great," Lakshmi said. "You should try it." Smits snapped his fingers, and Pseudo stood up and meandered over obediently. "Here." He handed her the electronic pencil and paper. "What should I make it do?" Lakshmi asked. She realized she was holding the pencil as if she'd never seen one before, and adjusted her grip. "Whatever you want," Smits said, grinning mischievously. "You can cue it to whatever you want, too. Something unusual that we won't see for a while, and then no one will ever know it was you." Lakshmi felt her own smile build in response, and then bent over the paper to start scribbling out code. Tama didn't often show his nerves, but he hadn't been able to stay in his chair and was pacing up and down in the kitted-up cafeteria when Cameron finally burst through the doors. "Where have you been?" he hissed, speed-walking over to align with their trajectory. "It's 5 minutes till the trial info release." "You told me to take a walk," Cameron said. "And it looks like it did you good, too," Tama admitted gruffly. "All for the best if it helps, but I've been covering for you to the Queen," jerking ahead at Stephanie, enshrined in supposed camaraderie at one of the long tables. "And I didn't know what to say, so I had to tell her you were throwing up in the bathroom with a touch of stage fright." Cameron snorted, but even that didn't seem to annoy them too much. "All right," they said, tossing their jacket over the back of their chair. "Let's do this."
You're listening to Machina, narrated by Natalie Naudis. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. Machina is written by Fran Wilde, Malka Older, and Curtis C. Chen. Produced by Marco Palmieri. Executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.